My name is Brent. I've been working in the film industry for about a decade building software for artists. Sliders are a great visual way to get numerical input. In this tutorial, I'm going to go over QSliders and the most common features that you're going to use with them. Code and a full article about it is linked down in the description. I've also included chapter markers, so feel free to skip around. Now let's get to the code. We're going to speed through some base code that all it does is set up a window that allows us to put some widgets in. So starting at the top, we have some imports for some of the things that we're going to be using. We subclass QMainWindow to create our own main window class that we can put our own widgets in. We override the init method and run super.init. We set the window title to be my QSlider window. We create a main layout that's a QVBox layout. If you haven't worked with layouts before, I've got a full tutorial that covers layouts that you can find up above as well as down in the description. But all you really need to know is for now that this just creates a layout such that we'll vertically stack the widgets that we add to the screen. Next, we create a widget. This is going to be the main widget that takes up the main window. We add the main layout to that widget, and then we set the central widget to be that widget. Down here, we define a main function where we create an application, we create a main window, we show the window, and then we execute. And then lastly, we run our main down here. And if we run that, we just run python main.py, we get an empty window that says my QSlider window. And that's a speed round of all of the base code that we're going to need before we start working with QSliders. So let's get to the QSliders. Going back to our code up at the top, we're going to need to add an import to QSlider. And so I'm just going to add a comma here and then type QSlider. Something else that we're going to need is we're going to have to add another import. And this is going to be from PyQt5.qtCore import Qt. This is going to be to allow us to specify that we want a horizontal slider. So if we go down here, let's actually create the slider. So we are going to do self.slider is equal to QSlider. And then we are going to pass it the orientation of the slider. And so we are going to do qt.horizontal. And then we want to add the slider to the main layout. So main layout dot add widget self dot slider. So to reiterate, we imported QSlider. We also imported Qt from QtCore. And then down here, we created a slider. Self.slider is equal to QSlider. And then we passed to QSlider the direction we wanted the slider to be in. By default, they are vertical. We want it to be horizontal. And so we pass it qt.horizontal. And then we want to add the slider to the window. And so we do main layout dot add widget self.slider. That's all we need to do to get a slider on the screen. So let's run it. Yeah, and as you can see here, we have a slider and you can move it and it looks great. One of the next things you might want to be able to do is set the value of the slider. So we're going to close this and then we're going to go back to our code and it's going to be really easy. It's just going to be self.slider.set value. And for our case, we're going to set it to 25. And if we go ahead and run it, you can see here that it moved the slider. So we've set the value of the slider. How about we actually get the value of the slider? So if we close this, I think what we're going to do is we're going to add a label to our window in order to show what the value of the slider is. And so we're going to go up at the top and we're going to add an import to QLabel. And then down below where we set the value of the slider, we're going to do self.label is equal to QLabel, and I am going to format a string and get the value of the label. And so to get the value of the label, all you have to do is we're going to get the value of the slider. So if we, to get the value of the slider, all we have to do is self.slider.value. And so lastly, we need to add the label to the main layout. So we need to do main layout.add widget, and we're going to do self.label. And so to go over this again, we are creating a label in order for us to put the value of the slider in and to be able to see it. And so we create a QLabel, which needs to be passed a string. And so I'm going to use the format function to be able to create that string, and we're passing format the value of the slider that you can get by self.slider.value. And then we add the label to the main layout so that it's on the screen. And so if we go ahead and run that again, python main.py, you can see here that the value is 25 because that's what we set it to previously. But you'll notice that if we move the slider, it does not update the label. So that's what we're going to do next, is we're going to update the code so that when the user moves the slider, it updates this label. So we're going to close this out and go back here, and under where we added the label, we're going to create some space. And what we're going to do is we're going to set up a callback function so that when the slider is moved, this function will be called. So for that callback, it's going to be self.slider.valueChanged.connect, and then self.onValueChanged. So what we're doing here is we're connecting a callback function to slider's value changed. So when the value is changed on the slider, it will call this function. And the function that's going to be called is one that we're going to define below in a moment, and we're calling that function self.onValueChanged. And so below the init, we're going to define on value changed, and value changed will give us the value, so that's going to be passed to this function, and then we want to update the label, so it's going to be self.label.setText, and then we're going to do the exact same thing we did previously, which is format a string, and then we're going to set the value. Note, you don't have to format it. You could just do string and then value, but I like to use format because a lot of times I'll go ahead and change what the text is, and so, or I'll need to do some formatting on the actual numbers. Maybe I'll pad it with zeros, or if we're working with floating points, I'll maybe want to set the number of digits that we want to show. But in any case, to go over this again, when slider's value change signal is emitted when the user moves the slider, call this onValueChanged function that we have defined down here, and it comes with a parameter. That parameter is value, and that value is the value of the slider, and then we're just going to update the label so that its text reads the value. So if we go ahead and clear and run it, we're going to do python main.py. You can see here that we have the slider, it's set to 25, and if we move the slider, it changes the label. So lastly, we're going to go over some niceties. So what we're going to do is we're going to set the minimum and maximum for the slider, as well as add some ticks. We're going to set the minimum to 0 and the maximum to 50, and then we're going to evenly space the ticks. Starting off, we're going to do self.slider.set minimum, and we're going to set that to 0. And we're going to do similar for the maximum. So we're going to do set maximum, and then we're going to set it to 50. So we're going to create ticks, so little lines below it. And then we're going to set the interval for those ticks. And so we're going to have them be every 5. So it's going to be self.slider.set tick interval. And we're going to set it to 5. So to go over this again, we're just setting the minimum to 0, setting the maximum to 50. We're creating ticks below the slider and setting the interval, so the spacing for those ticks to be every 5 values. So if we go ahead and run it, yes, you can see here that we have our slider, and it's set to 25. As you can see here, the handle is directly in the middle, as we would expect, with having the minimum be 0 and the maximum be 50. And so if I bring it all the way to the left, you can see here that we have it set to 0. If we bring it all the way to the right, it's set to 50. And you can move it around. And those are the most common things that you're going to want to do when you're working with QSliders. Thank you for watching. If you have a topic you would like me to cover in a future video, please put it down in the comments. I'm always looking for new ideas. If you got value out of this video, please hit the like button, and if you want to see more, please consider subscribing. And like all software made for movies, we test in production. Thank you, and I'll see you around.